The ability to encode and decode the message in communicating is a very critical skill that, if we ought to be progressive in any organization, in any relationship, even in our own personal lives, we need to invest more time in. The most important one being the ability to listen objectively and listening without prejudice. What do I mean by listening without prejudice? I'm sure a lot of us have come across situations where you're talking to someone about a particular subject matter, and you can clearly see in their expression that they're just waiting for you to say you're done so that they can respond. And their response was already predetermined before they even had the fullness of what you were going to say. That on its own becomes a false start for those that know athletics when we're just about to run from our starting markings. Before the gunshot goes, no one should move. Only when the gunshot goes can we move. And when you move before the gunshot, it's called a false start. It's a disqualification. It has to be started again. And more than half the times we find ourselves restarting, meaning going back to the same things that we talked about yesterday, that we talked about last week, that we talked about last month, that we talked about last year, that we talked about many years ago. And you find that people still are not able to find one another. And part of the reason for that is there's always someone, if not both of the parties, who are interested in winning the topic or winning the argument at hand, with less interest of finding a common ground. And unfortunately, this is what beats even the best of communicators, not the best of communicators, but the best of leaders sometime, wherein, for some or other reason, what is of interest to me as an individual takes precedence over what is of interest and of benefit for both of us or all of us in that institution or in that subject or goal of communication. What this means, therefore, is, and I like the word, the phrase that is always used, that we don't find one another. We keep missing each other because we don't talk to one another. We talk at each other. And that is, I'm sure, something that we have had before. And I don't know whether it's pride or whether it's just sheer stubbornness. The people who are more learned in those matters can actually help us there. But suffice it to say that there is a thing that exists in us that makes us not to be receptive. Instead of being objective, we take a stance and a position of opposition. And sometimes that stance of opposition is not something that is obvious even to ourselves. It just shows itself maybe as, you have to hear my point. You have to take my point of view. Whatever you say is not important. What is important is what I have to say, because I've thought about this and I've researched maybe about this, and everything else that falls outside of the ambit of my understanding of this on this subject matter is not acceptable. So my goal is to make you understand and accept my position and my understanding at any cost. And at the heart of what I'm talking about here, at the heart of the reason of me agreeing to come and speak here, is minding the cost of pushing or driving a particular point across. Minding that cost, if that cost is going to be the relationship, number one. Number two, if that cost is going to be, after having done all of that verbal exercise, that verbal exchange, you have wasted time, you have wasted energy, and you've even wasted emotions, and you have not come to a conclusion that is going to be progressive and mutually beneficial. That is too high a cost. It's actually the ultimate cost to pay if your goal for starting the communication in the first place was to arrive at a resolution and at a solution in order to make relationship or relations from that point on easier. Having said that, it brings me to point number two. And the second point is this, that when you come into a space of communicating in order to get to a resolution, not in order to get to your point of view, but to a resolution that will be mutually beneficial, not only for now, because the problem more than half the time is to think about the now and to be influenced about the now, and overly emphasize the feeling now and the interest now to the detriment of the future, whether intermediary or long term. What this means is that if what we are communicating about, the resolution thereof, does not provide us with long-term mutual benefit, then it probably is the most prudent thing not to then engage in that communication. Number two, it may very well be that in the interest of the future, communication may be mute. What do I mean by that? You know, there is a term commission, and the opposite of that term is omission. Where, if we were to talk in legal terms, we would say you have offended by commission, meaning that you have positively applied or acted in this commission of whatever offense it is. And then there is a part where you have offended by not acting when you are reasonably expected to have acted. Sorry. What that means is when the responsibility on you would have been to act, and you failed to act, and as a result thereof there was a prejudice that was suffered, then you have indeed offended by not commission but by omitting to act when there was a responsibility on you to act. And conversely, the same can be said, that there are things that you don't always have to speak on. That you can talk does not mean you must always talk. And that is one of the trickiest things that we find ourselves in. more than half the times. Because more than half the times, when we are faced with a choice between response and non-response, and it's a tricky balance, we normally are quick to choose response, as in verbally, when withholding comment can also be a response, and probably in most cases it may be the best and most prudent choice to make. That's number one. The second one is, even though sometimes withholding the comment may be the prudent thing, it does not mean, because I know I can already feel another person saying that, yeah, so ben pindin the TED so I guess like well in a nix that does not help. It doesn't help either. It's just as bad as the opposite, because it doesn't achieve much. It comes out of a place that is not intending to construct a positive and a mutually beneficial path to a resolution that will have lasting impact. This sounds, I know, like a shifting goalpost, but that is what it is. There is no cut and dry deal. There's no law cast on stone with regards to how you communicate and how you make your communication successful. Because the worst thing that I can do right now to all of you and all of you that are watching right now is to say, here is the cut and dry solution that is a fit for all. That will be misleading you. And that is why a lot of people make a mistake of trying to copy and paste conflict resolution methods and techniques and styles of other institutions or other relationships and try to import them in their relationship. And you find that actually that action on its own, it's the reason why there will be an explosion. Even when there was not going to be an explosion, yes, there was conflict. And in human relations, conflict is an inherent part of growing together as humans. We need to also be awake to that conflict does not mean we are bad or the other party is bad. More than half the time, it will be me saying that the other party is bad, the other party is wrong. It's conflict is a healthy human occurrence. It happens whenever there's people, and in fact, most of the time, I would like to submit, and this is my last and final point on this topic. I would like to submit that the expectation that there will be no conflict actually is a breeding ground for a serious conflict. So if you were to expect, and this brings us to a question of expectations that we have from other people, instead of poising ourselves, posturing ourselves to be pliable, to make this relationship to work, we have expectations, and more than half the time the conflict gets exacerbated by the expectations or over expectations, and because of those expectations not having been met, we become disappointed and despondent, and others' reactions are more grave than others. Some just throw the baby with the bathwater over something that could have been dealt with. So what am I saying? Because my time now is coming to an end on this particular topic. What I'm saying is, there is a saying in Xhosa that says, "Hlala nomntu uze umazi." You will give me a better opinion of the person that you have lived long with, that you have had a long relationship with, and in fact, your position with regards to your opinion about them will be even strengthened by the presence of disagreements or conflict. And I want us to not be allergic to the word conflict. Conflict is not a bad word. It's just a word that says there is difference of opinion. So whenever there is a conflict or a dissensus on certain issues, that is not a reason to throw tantrums and go crazy. In fact, it's an opportunity to strengthen that particular relationship. That is my posture and understanding on the topic.